Eric. Welcome everyone to the third day of our AgMIP meetings this week. So after 2 days of team meetings, today we have two formal plenary sessions as part of our AgMIP team's open house. So this session will be shared by myself, Senthold Essing, and Anthony Whitbread. We are all members of the AgMIP executive committee, and we'll share the work this morning, day, afternoon, evening, night, wherever you are. So let me give a brief introduction. This meeting, I think, has already been a success with more than 700 registrants from, as you see, more than 95 countries. So very good attendance, which shows the vibrance of this AgMIP community still. Yeah, let me just mention a few activities as part of the executive committee. This is a growing and vibrant community with 40+ research and application activities, and you can always check out the AgMIP website, the relaunched website, also with the team's sub-websites where you can see the updates on the latest activities. It's actually a worldwide science community. Since 2010 actually, and you see some examples of the meetings we had over time, team meetings, global meetings, and of course we are very much looking forward to the next physical global meeting to see you all again physically and with all the personal interactions. But I think we are doing pretty well still with our virtual opportunities so far. So in terms of content, AgMIP enables evaluation of food and agricultural challenges and testing of response strategies. And at the core are, of course, our agricultural models, whether they are physical, biophysical, or socioeconomic. And then we engage in baseline intercomparisons on historical climate and policy. We calibrate and improve our models. And of course, we evaluate and intercompare our models. So intercomparison and improvement is, of course, core to AgMIP. And then we use these existing and improved models to do future assessments on climate and food systems, of course, on adaptation, mitigation, and certain extensions. And on the economic side, on future agricultural production, trade, and food security. So we're really linking across scales, across topics here, and across modeling communities. And we have a lot of great examples of model linkages across disciplines as well. You have seen this picture before of many of the activities, whether they start with climate information, with crop modeling for the different crops, about data and tool integration. It ranges from global biophysical and global economic assessments to regional and crop specific, more or less integrated assessment. And of course, we also have these integrated regional teams. So a growing list of activities to assess current and future risks to food security in a widest sense. And of course, we want to build together a more productive, sustainable, resilient, and healthy food system. And I think many AgMIP researchers contribute to this. There's also a wide range of local and subnational activities with a lot of experimental and observational sites. You see here around the world, cutting across a large number of relevant agricultural crops, or specific regional assessments or other agronomic studies. So a very valuable network of AgMIP-based site-specific research work, which has been growing over time. In terms of recent papers, projects, and workshops, okay, here I only mentioned a few, but of course you can also look at the agmip.org website on publications. Just to name a few here, John Antle and colleagues worked on trade-off analysis, of course, for food systems. There was work on food system emissions, a recent paper a lot on different crop-specific aspects. You see aspects of crop yield impacts and adaptation, but also mitigation, greenhouse gas emission reduction from food systems, and also comparing global assessments. And one example was the paper on scenario projections regarding future yield increases in terms of technological change in agriculture. So these are just a few examples, but there are many more to be found on the website. Also just released is the new version of the handbook of climate change and agro ecosystems, climate change and farming systems planning in Africa and South Asia, also related to AgMIP stakeholder-driven research in 2 parts. So this is another very nice outcome of the AgMIP work at different scales and different aspects of the sector. Of course, there's a call for everyone interested to get involved in AgMIP activities, to help AgMIP to develop new topics and new protocols, also beyond the things which already have been done. It's all about informing decisions for societal challenges. It's getting involved in multiple modeling groups, different types of modeling approaches in different locations, improving models and methods in terms of comparison and improvement. And there's always the opportunity to connect to the full set of AgMIP activities. And we are also developing the leadership of the whole program to make it as inclusive as possible, and also to share the credits of the different participants. So I think, or I hope every one of you knows how to get in touch with AgMIP in different ways. Again, I refer you to the website. And well, this week here with a high number of participants already, or again, has proven that the interaction works, and there's still a lot of enthusiasm around all these AgMIP related activities. So with that, I'll end my brief overview. This is the agenda for today's session, about 2.5 hours. We decided to share the chairing here. So I will be chairing the panel 1 and 2, and then Anthony will take over for panel 3, and Sentold will take over chairing panel 4. And I will have to leave a bit early, so Sentold will then also engage in closing and wrapping up the session. Yeah, session 2 is later, so I think I can stop share my screen. And because every presentation only has 8 minutes sharp, I'll now call to our first speaker, which is Toshi Hasegawa. He's a leader of the Impact Assessment and Adaptation Group at the Institute for Agro-Environmental Sciences in Tsukuba, Japan. So Toshi, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Herman. Thanks to everybody and Eric and to organize this wonderful, and also to give me the opportunities to present our recent work in the AgMIP Rice team. AgMIP Rice is one of the crop modeling teams, started in 2011, so it's 10 years. It's not a big group, it's around 10 active rice modelers get together. But we are moving slowly, but I think it's still working. Today, among many other things, I would just introduce 2 major team activities. One is genotype by environment interaction, and 2 topics here. So one is gene-based modeling for phenology at stage 2 flowering, as a function of temperature for this period. And second was geotyping for future climate. That's for yield mostly. Second topic is about climate change impacts. Well, our team has just started this ensemble projection for using CMIP6. And model performance in the short-term extreme heat is a little bit different topic. but I just go through it very quickly. Sorry, it's a really busy slide. And this integration of genomics with rice phenology models is led by Yang, Yubin Yang, Texas A&M. And this work has just been submitted under review and under revision at this stage. And the idea is that any crop models, we do this days to flowering projection based on the genetic coefficients. And that's the general practice, but we just wanted to link that with the genomic information. So that we did is using 7 rice phenology models and tested against this phenology data of 196 genotypes obtained in 13 environments. And these parameters are linked with the genomic data, SNPs to be exact. And we did a genomic prediction independently. So this calibration stage, it worked well, but in short, and this part is still not satisfactory. So if you run this genomic prediction for the untested genotypes and unknown environments, that's still a major challenge. So this paper, we discussed areas that need improvements, not just crop models, but for the genotype information and also the phenotypes data. So not just one reason that makes this really difficult, but the other problems also are here. So that's one of our progress here. Second topic is about idiotyping using multiple models approach. And what's unique here is that we are targeting the trait basis rather than parameter. And in most of the cases for rice our crop modelers use parameter as the genetic coefficient, but we firstly discussed with breeders and what traits they are interested, and then we link that traits to model parameters, and then our parameters now trace back to trait so that we can communicate with breeders. So that's the idea. And we did a simulation using 4 sentinel sites, one in Philippines, India, China, Japan, very diverse environments using 4 future climate scenarios, 2 GCMs, 2 RCPs targeting the mid-century, and 1 adaptation strategy. And we run the 9 models participated in this practice. And a takeaway is ensemble idiotypes outyield the current cultivars by 16 to 42%. It depends on the area, depends on the regions, and depends on the time frame, the scenarios. But there's a hope that we can improve by using these idiotypes. And the promising traits differ depending on the location. So it's location-specific idiotyping is needed. That's the major message. For instance, if you need bigger grain numbers or better grain growth in Los Banos, canopy structure is important in India. Phenology is important in Cgiar. So it's a different target, different strategy needed for different locations. That's the major lessons we learned. Second part of our major activity is climate impacts. And we're still working in Asia mostly because the rice is mostly grown in Asia, nearly 90% of production. We are lucky to get this large data set covering different locations from 7 locations across Asia. And mean temperature of the season ranged from 20 to 28. And 2 cultivars tested at all sites and the common practices. And that's one in India, the indica, the other one is temperate japonica. And we just wanted to firstly ask how the models were produced G by E with limited information. And secondly, we test these models with the CMIP6 data. So it's a really busy slides. And this is, well, the first, to answer the first question, the ensemble mean provides reasonable estimates as and many other studies. But with the blind simulations, with just 2 phenology data sets and 2 sites are fairly good enough to give us a reasonable yield estimates. And with that confidence, and we tested these models using the CMIP6 slides and at different sites in S1 to S7, and with the 3 different RCPs, thanks to Jonas and Alex, who provided us this CMIP scenario, climate scenarios, and y-axis is the grain yield. And here in the x-axis, the year for this century. And as you can see from the first 3 sites in top, relatively close sites, we see, particularly when it comes to the high emission scenarios, we get positive influence, but from S4 onward to the south, and you get negative signs. So we are now looking into what's the dividing temperature for these responses and looking into what are the processes involved. And so the manuscript is in preparation. This is not the same that we use these chamber results for short-term heat, extreme heat stresses. And it went up to just 2 to 9 days, very short exposure to heat up to 44 degrees in Nanjing. And we just use the temperature function, not the whole models. We just pull out extracted temperature functions for grain setting and grain growth that are most susceptible to heat from 14 rice models. And the lesson learned from here is unfortunately, none of the models reproduce severe yield reductions. So that means the ensemble doesn't work in this case. It's a very acute short-term heat stresses. And we also discussed the ways to improve accuracy for different functions in this paper. So that's published for Global Change Biology. So if you have a chance, please have a look. And lastly, and this is a plan for the next activity. So I've introduced 2 things, G/E studies and multi-location studies. I will now combine them together and expand the sites and the global sites. And because we've been working on mostly rice fields in Asia, but we just wanted to expand that to the global sites. We're lucky to have this great collaborators from Cgiar, IAR, Rice Antennas Initiative that had 50 trials at 22 sites across different continents, and have different 58 genotypes tested. So we can use this data to test our G/E studies in multi-location. And also, we plan to collaborate with GGCMI and to check whether these both different types of model, different spatial resolution can give a similar or different results based on this exercise. Okay, that's about it from my side. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Toshi. Just to remind everyone, we'll have the time for discussion and questions after the 5th presentation. So please unshare your screen, Toshi.
Okay.
And yeah, thanks very much. And then I'll call on Enli Wang from the CSIRO in Australia, continuing with the canola topic. Enli, the floor is yours.
Yeah, hello, can you see my slides?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, thank you, Herman, and hello, everyone. Toshi said that they move slowly with the rice team, and for the canola team, we have been inactive for quite a while, actually. For these updates, what I'm going to do is, I think, is probably to give you some very quick summary of what has been done, where we're at, and then point to some new opportunities around us and see whether we could gather new interest for potential joint work. Firstly, like all the other crop teams, our objectives was to identify the models and develop protocols for calibration and validation, and trying to identify knowledge gaps for model improvement, and finally use the models to support R&D. That's not different from other groups. We had 8 canola models, 14 participants from 5 countries, and gathered experimental data from 5 sites in countries including USA, Germany, Italy, China, and Australia. So the data sets are for different canola cultivars and the treatment with different sowing time, nitrogen rates, or in different years. We had the normal protocols for partial calibration and full calibration. And the partial calibration is only to give the ancestors and maturity dates. For full calibration, we give the full data for one treatment and trying to calibrate the model and validate the model against the remaining data. Just want to see, in addition to those, we also finished the full multifactorial simulations for 30 years for each site to explore the impact of climate and management changes. This includes 5 CO2 concentration, 7 temperature offsets, 5 rainfall changes, and 5 nitrogen rates. The findings for that exercise is that partial calibration could not give us good simulation, even with the ensemble mean. And this is probably different from the results from other models. Only after full calibration, most models could correctly simulate biomass and yield, but not leaf area and nitrogen uptake. So ensemble mean and media better approximated yield, but the uncertainty in simulation remained very large, possibly due to different structures of the canola models. I guess the key point here is that with the canola models we had, the partial calibration, the model only with partial calibration, the models could not simulate biomass yield even with ensemble mean. So a few areas of further work were identified, including a demand for quality data to improve modeling of post-anthesis growth, for example, pod photosynthesis or radiation use efficiency, and detachment of organs like leaves. Response to high temperature and CO2 increase, which was not well modeled in the canola models. They also include impact of water and nitrogen interactions. This is based on the inability of some models to simulate response to nitrogen rates. Okay, we did finish a research paper and submitted to journal GCB, but rejected largely due to inconsistency in results from the sensitivity analysis. Revision of the paper has never been finished due to lack of responses or lack of actions to redo the sensitivity analysis. We relocated the paper just recently, and we found that our finding is still important. We try to revise the paper by downplaying the importance of the sensitivity analysis part. Hopefully we can resubmit it in the near future. So the next step work, we discussed the following things, including improved modeling of key physiological processes that I mentioned previously, and also improved modeling of G by E by M interactions, including a potential link to advanced understanding of genetics and functional genomics, like Toshi talked for rice. And then apply the model to support research areas in breeding or breeding yield potential gap analysis and climate change impact analysis. At some point, we had 5 groups with colleagues working on 4 models at that time. But we never started the phase 2. That's why I said the group has been inactive for quite a while due to a couple of reasons, including people moved on to other work, finishing project, lack of new findings or interests. Also probably because canola is a relatively small crop and then less projects. Of course, COVID-19 is on top of that. It's a major reason for that as well. However, recently we have some potential opportunities that could lead to future work. The AppSeed team in Australia is developing the canola model in AppSeed next generation, which includes an attempt to improve the model for simulating key physiological processes in G by E and with potential links to genotyping data and the SNPs, similar to what Toshi mentioned for rice. And there are some new interests from China and other colleagues requiring canola modeling to support research. And also in Australia, we have recently developed a proposal for a potential Australian-China project on modeling crops and the cropping systems. So we also hope to get, if possible, some new interests and see whether we can get a new interest from this AgMIP open house, and particularly from colleagues in Europe and America. If anyone has an interest, and please contact us. I have put our email address on the slides. I think that's probably all I want to report. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Enli, and Toshi and you already put a high bar here on the time keeping. Very good. So please unshare your screen. And I didn't mention before, all the audience, please put your questions already now into the Q&A box. And I'll now call on our next speaker on maize ET, with Ken Booty, Professor Emeritus from the University of Florida. So Ken, the floor is yours.
Okay, I think you can see the slide.
Looks good.
Yes, I'm presenting in behalf of Bruce Kimball, who's not available today. And we had a multi-model intercomparison, 41 versions of maize models, and this shows the list of authors. What's different from the Ames, Iowa prior study was this was conducted at two other sites, Mead, Nebraska, and Isuker, where the good part was that we had rain-fed compared to irrigated over 6 years with very good growth analysis and ET measured by eddy covariance, and also lysimeter studies conducted at Bushland, Texas, led by Stephen Everett over 2 years. And the protocols follow the policy, again, in the same way of starting with a blind phase where there's enough information to run the models, but only phenology provided the first time. Second phase was to provide the growth, LAI, biomass, and yields for the irrigated treatment only. The third phase was to provide the ET and soil water data for the fully irrigated treatments. And the last phase was to provide all data, including data with the rain-fed treatments. And there's one modeling group waiting, but pretty well, we're ready to start writing papers and analyzing. Now, this list the models, they're not truly 41 because some of the models had different flavors within. For example, MaizeSim with daily and hourly. Sticks had 2 versions. The DSAT has multiple options with different ET options and different soil evaporation options. So we can test, evaluate approaches within models. This shows a picture of the Mead, Nebraska, where the flux site tower in the maize field. This is the Meriflux data. This is the weighing lysimeters at Bushland, Texas. It's 4 by 4 meter. And yes, this is done also in maize, but this happens to be cotton. So a very large lysimeter size compared to, I guess, typical. Here's some of the first data for daily ET against days after planting. The top slide, part of the slide is for the irrigated field, and the bottom one would be for the rain-fed. 2003 happened to be a water-stressed year. Now, what's shown here is red will be the daily ET, and blue will be the median of the models of the 41. And just a little bit generic response I'll show you. And this is phase 2. This is still blind ET. The models tended to be a little bit too high in the incomplete phase, which is related to uncertainty dealing with soil evaporation, and a little bit too high toward the end of the season, not knowing how to stop. And the leaf area is probably mostly dead or dormant and turning from green, and still the models are not shutting it down. In the rain-fed plots, initially the models were under-predicting during the water stress period, running out of water because, and later this was resolved by dealing with having good soil water data and possibly modifying rooting uptake. This shows normalized root mean square error, which is similar to CV. And first to point out, in this 2003 year, there's greater variability in the rain-fed, which is not surprising. And this is variability among roughly 40 models. Generally finding that the median is better than any individual model, except in the case of the rain-fed, maybe 2 models were better. So it's still holding that the median is a good predictor and probably the best one. This shows the time series of daily ET versus days after planting at bushland. And there's not really water stress, but 2 different irrigation treatments, the one putting out a little bit less water. What we note here is that there's quite high ET full canopy, between 10 to 12 millimeters per day. And the models are tending not to pick that up. A little bit, we saw the same phenomenon. The models are tending to predict a little bit high toward the end of the cycle, again, not knowing quite how to shut down. This shows the normalized root mean squared error. And remember, this is pretty well similar for both treatments. And as before, the median is a better predictor than most models in both cases. Now, here's a comparison of full canopy phase, 41 to 100 days after planting. So it's transpiration dominated. And here's where the model variance is much smaller, maybe a 10 to 15% variability, ability to predict daily ET. And in the incomplete phase, -10 before planting to +20 after planting, this is where the models show a lot of variation. And again, the median is better. Now, under the full canopy phase, a number of models are approaching, not quite as good as the median. This, we'll do more work with this. This is a plot of observed against daily ET, the scatter for all 41 models. But just to show you an example of that, where an individual model may show a lot of scatter, when you take the median of observed against simulated, the 1-to-1 line is showing a pretty good prediction. So this project has reached mostly completion of simulations. Several models do a respectable job of simulating ET. Despite considerable variation in daily ET, the cumulative ET over longer periods is less variable, and the median of the models is generally a good predictor. We have a lot of data to work through yet, including evaluating time series, biomass, leaf area, soil moisture, soil temperature, and a publication is planned for a draft going to agricultural and forest meteorology. There'll be so much data there that we feel that we'll have to do substantial supplemental materials file with graphs. And I think that's the last slide. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Very nice. Also very disciplined with the times. Thank you very much. We are doing really well here. And so we can directly continue to, sorry, I have to look at the schedule, to Bali. And I hope I pronounced your name right. The floor is open for Gennady Bracho-Mujica. Let me just say, a postdoctoral researcher at University of Göttingen in Germany. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you. Yeah, so many thanks for the opportunity to present here. We are not actually an AgMIP Bali group, but we have a global study, modeling study of Bali that would like to present. Here I'm presenting motivation and preliminary results, and in the afternoon session, Raimund Rota will present the next steps that we have left. So why is a global barley study necessary? Well, we all know that barley is the fourth most important cereal crop after maize, rice, and wheat, and the global demand for food as well as for beverages is expected to continue growing. And of course, for example, the beer and whiskey industries are quite concerned regarding these effects of climate change and extreme weather events on barley production. And we have this great opportunity to look at experimental results that are available from very contrasting environment with different stress conditions that came from a project we are working with, Barista, and also from predecessor projects such as Klimba that we have participated, our group have participated. Now, the experimental data set we have comes from 5 different sites, from Dundee, Halle, and Al-Kharak, Dubai, and Adelaide in Australia, looking at different stress treatments, essentially drought and nitrogen deficiency were the stress we were paying attention to. We exclude the Dubai case because of the salinity was the main stressor. And that actually gives us a huge opportunity for a full combination of Geotype design and breeding for climate resilient barley cultivars. And with this framework, this very nice framework and large data sets we have from this project, the objectives of this particular study, the hep yield study, but the way hep yield, it comes from the lines that were developed by Professor Klaus Billen from the Martin Luther University at Halle. And here we're focusing on investigating to what extent an ensemble of widely applied crop simulation models are, and their individual members are able to reproduce relationships between flowering time and yield in spring barley under very contrasting environments. And also to examine the relative importance of genotype and sowing time on yield performance in these various environments, to later assess and compare model performance, analyze where the deficiencies, if they come here, the potential causes, and later, of course, where the required model improvements for capturing these abiotic stresses that we saw in the field and the different G/E combinations. Now we have nice data measuring the field. 11 traits were measured in these trials that were conducted for 2 consecutive years, 2015, 2016. And we have phenological traits as well as physiological traits. Now we planned the exercise, we started planning the exercise early 2020, and we launched it in May 2020. It was planned as a 4-step study, but we already thinking about steps 5 and 6. At the moment, we have completed the first step, in which we focus on the calibration of crop simulation models. And we concentrate on those sites, or we use the data we have from those sites with the most of the traits measured for the 2 years of trials. We use a reference cultivar at each site. So in case of Halle, we use Barke, and in Adelaide, we use Navigator. And we also selected a number of hep lines. That's completed, and now we have completed also step 2, which is the validation step, and steps 3 and 4 will be released this year. Professor Rota will discuss on these next steps that we have planned this afternoon. These are the participating institutions of this study. We have 8 institutions, 9 crop models, and 19 scientists, to which we would like to, of course, say thank you if you're here with us today. Now I will take maybe last minute I have available to show some preliminary results. We're still processing data. These are results from the Step One Calibration. And here we have this comparison of simulated versus observed flowering date. We have 2 seasons shown here and only a selection of models. And we have the reference cultivar at Halle and also 3 headlines shown here. And essentially what we notice, of course, is that this HEP 15082 was quite challenging for the calibration. And here's where we have to discuss with the experimentalists. And this is a nice setting, I would say, the conditions for the exercise, because in this very sub-project, we have the chance to meet with the experimentalists and the breeders. And then we come, the crop modeling group, to discuss on these issues. And the final, my final slide is to show you our preliminary results on the grain yield. And again, as a summary of some models, we look how these 3 models at the top are doing a very good job on predicting yield. And then the last 3 models we show here are very good when it comes to the Halle site, but when it comes to Adelaide, which are the blue ones, they are really overestimated. So there's a lot to discuss among the group to understand the initial results, and we're really looking forward to continue working on this study. Thanks.
Thanks, Gennady. Very nice presentation, very concise. Thank you. So please unshare your screen as well. Of course, we cannot cover the major crops without talking about wheat, right? So we are moving on to Central Dasseng, executive committee member of AgMIP and Technical University of Munich, Germany. And Central, the floor is yours for the next 8 minutes.
Thanks, Herman. I have only 1 slide. I used the summary slide. Thanks again for the introduction. And yes, wheat is important. Wheat has been around also for quite a while. We had yesterday our 15th AgMIP meeting of the wheat team. We started with one of the first teams very early with AgMIP. We started, I think, with 27 models. The last phase, which we call now phase 4, got off with 48 modeling groups with a lot of parallel models. In the end, quite a few actually dropped out, but we still work with about 30 groups in there. When we started about 10, 11 years ago, we looked at uncertainties at key locations and tried to describe it. We then realized that a lot of uncertainties come from temperature and from heat stress. So we focused for many years afterwards on heat stress, particularly looking at experimental data to understand if and how the models deal actually with heat stress. We started at this time applications to 30 well-defined locations. With the heat stress, we spent quite a few years on heat stress and expanded it in looking at interactions with CO2. We looked also in the last few years at content, at protein as a quality issue of a food product, and expanded again further our locations to 30 global locations to be able to talk about global production. This last phase, phase 4, which I briefly want to introduce here to you, is about building on this experience. We also moved now into trades. Over the years, we built very good relationships with experimentalists, and maybe just point this out. We're having now 8 experimentalists in our group, which really help us with detailed data. And I think we had one of the most amazing data sets available for these exercise from high yielding environments in New Zealand, in northern France, and the Americas, Chile, Argentina, and Mexico. And in this experiment from the Americas, which were done by CIMMYT, we had the chance, I think for the first time, even before we, and I think also others, try to simulate trades. But here for the first time, we were able to test the models if they can reproduce the impact of crop trades. And these were trades. The main one in there was radiation use efficiency and some others which really pushed the yields up. And the models, at least in the median, that means also many of the models were able to reproduce this impact of new trades in isolation of any other things as well. And that's shown in this one figure up here. The top 2 are locations in Chile. The BA is in Argentina, and the CO is in Mexico. And you can see in here as orange triangles and connected with the line, the baseline high-yielding cultivar plus the traits. And this is sort of the impact of these traits, 30–40% yield increase, and the simulations in green. And this is a medium of all the models which participated. I said about 30 made it in the end. And for Valdivia, the highest yielding environments, we're talking about yields in the baseline of 11–12 tons, pushing the yields up to 14–15, maybe even up to 16 tons here. And the models as a medium were able to reproduce that. Interesting, the same field experiments were carried out in Argentina and in Mexico. For Argentina, the models did well. There were some issues in Mexico. Some of that might be related to the way the experiments were done. Some of you might be aware that in Mexico, most of the experiments, as in reality, and with the farmers, wheat is grown on rice beds, which sort of gives you a different relationship to what is the actual area there. So we really spent a lot of time. This is one of the data sets. I also mentioned France and very detailed data from New Zealand. We're using these models and sort of confront them with a lot of detailed data. We try to upscale, in particular looking at the traits. And at the same time, we thought we need to start looking at the resources which are needed to sustain such high yields. Yesterday, we talked about 6 different papers, publications, which are in different stages. One of them will hopefully will be submitted very soon, down to some sort of outline of ideas of where we want to go. Noteworthy might be to say, when we scaled it up, what we found at these few locations that seems to halt at a global production, if we scale it up over our known representative locations, that with these traits, if they can be introduced to local varieties around the world, might give us a yield boost of 30–50%. Did I mention already yesterday there were 37 participants? We continue analyzing these amazing, huge data set, and we started also talking about what next. So we had a bit of a discussion. We will want to continue this in the next months to think of where should we concentrate more in the future. There seemed to be a tendency that model improvement, particularly with some aspects which the models can't incorporate, but are very important when it comes to climate risk and climate change, to take them on board. Thanks for your attention. Back to you, Hermann.
Yes, thanks, Sentold. Amazing. With this packed schedule, we still have a couple of minutes time for questions. One question in the Q&A section has already been answered. So that's nice for the moderator. If you have specific questions to any of the presenters now, please either put it into the chat or raise your virtual hand. It's depending on your Zoom version, it's on the bottom line, there is the raise hand function. So please, we have 98 participants as I see. Any questions on those major crops? Carolyn has a question. Carolyn, please.
Hi, yeah, thank you. I guess my question has to do with the experiments on nitrogen uptake. I'm just wondering if there's a difference between the amount of nitrogen uptake that plants are able to take on compared to the assumptions that are made in the models. And I'm sure that that's known, but I don't, yeah, I'm just wondering about that, especially when we see the traits potentially increasing the yields by wheat is so much, but then with large nitrogen increases. So does someone have information on that aspect?
So when we started doing these high yielding environments, they were grown under lots of, if there was not enough water with additional irrigation, it was lots of fertilizer to sustain. So the observed high yields, they show that crops can take these large amounts of nutrients up. But we were interested to see what does it actually mean when you then take it back to the global level. Nitrogen, the production of nitrogen releases CO2. Nitrogen causes a lot of environmental problems, particularly on high levels when you supply a lot. And if you get a high rainfall event, you might leach a lot of nitrogen. So I think around nitrogen, there are a lot of issues which at the moment we don't really touch. We just realized we need to sort of see what's going on there. And one of the future activities could actually include to go back to some of the nitrogen experiments where people applied it at different levels and at different stages to see how well the models actually deal with it and what it actually also means in terms of environmental impact.
Yeah, thanks, Sentold. Raimund Rötter, please.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, very good.
Okay, thanks, Herman. Yes, I have a question not only to Sentold but maybe to the leadership team. Sentold mentioned we were discussing yesterday some future plans, how we would go on. This morning, Toshi has shown what they are doing for rice. Is there some idea to align activities for the big crops like rice, wheat, maize, do similar things so that one have comparable results? Like Toshi, I think he was showing multi-locational versus yeah, some other way of doing climate change impact assessments with CMIP 6. Is there similar plans, Sentold, or yeah, what is there some coordination on that?
Maybe as a short answer, it's at the moment it's not. Even we moving in sort of similar directions, and as we done in the very earlier phases where we eventually did very similar experiments following the same protocols, which then allowed us actually to make comparison across crops. Since everyone works with protocols, if any of the other groups want to move in the exactly same direction, I think we usually exchange the protocols, which will then allow to sort of replicate similar experiments with obviously other data, but with a very similar approach, which will allow to do comparison. But it's not coordinated at the moment.
Yeah. I'm also asking because we just started with barley, as you heard. You know, yeah. Just thinking about how to integrate it.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think Daniel Wallach had raised his hand.
Yes, thank you. This is very similar to what Raimund just said. When we listen to these reports from the different crops, you have the feeling that a lot of the problems that are raised are the same kinds of problems. So idiotyping seems to be something that a lot of different crops are doing, or responses to extreme stresses. And the question would be, to what extent would it be possible to share model improvement or model procedures between the different crops?
Who are you asking this question specifically?
In fact, to everybody, but in fact, maybe to you or to Sentold.
Well, I can probably not answer, but whoever from the panelists wants to jump in, please go ahead, just speak up.
I have an opinion, but maybe someone else should say something. If nobody says something, I have a comment here.
I don't know, Ken or Enli or Toshi, you want to respond to this?
I'll try to give a short response to the heat stress ones. I think that the different crops will have somewhat similar issues with heat stress on, say, pollen viability and early grain formation. And in that case, where one group may have solved an issue or how to do it, it probably would be very helpful. Like the paper that Toshi mentioned by Sun. The issue there with elevated temperature is a very dominant stress period that's important for a short time before flowering and after. And that's very different from having one constant temperature shift over the whole season. So looking at common mechanisms across the models might be a way to improve.
I think in our experience, it's just simply using this really high heat event rather than taking average of Tmax helps a lot in terms of reducing the uncertainty. So, well, in the models, they often do say 5-day average of Tmax for a certain period, but that really, in some cases, reduces this single events, like 1 or 2 days, very high heat events. So that's the lesson we learned. It's fairly simply, we can fix that in a way, but you need to have a really good data set, like Sun's, like with a very short period of a really extreme intense heat. And if we can have those experiments, and that's very good to compare among different crops. And hopefully we get publication in each crops and probably have a synthesis paper on this heat stresses. That would be a fascinating idea.
There are very few good data sets with that elevated heat stress during phases. Rice is one example. Maize is very rare and very hard to accomplish, for example, the heat stress periods, because it's so tall on the field grown plant.
So sorry to cut you short. Enli, one final remark maybe, and then we have to move on to the next
what I
panel.
want
Go
to
ahead.
say is very quickly, thank you, Herman, to Sentold and other Toshi probably. We are mentioning that we are progressing the modeling and by linking the physiological processes to genetic understanding or SNPs, functional genomics, etc. We have been doing work in Australia for wheat and barley phenology in that area, and different people are working in that front as well. There may be value to share some of the experiences or coordinate some of the activities so that we can move forward together.
Okay, thanks, Enli. I refer the panelists also to the Q&A session. There's 3 questions on wheat and rice. So Sentold and Toshi, please go to that and answer that in written form. Alex Rain, maybe you can also put your question there. I suggest that we move on. It was clear that there was not enough time for discussion with all these interesting crop modeling results. So please continue in the Q&A box to discuss. And we'll now come to panel 2, which I will also be chairing on data and models. And I'll call on Daniel Wallach, now retired from INRA in France, to start your talk on calibration first. Daniel, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I have to find where this is. Okay. Just a second.
Yeah, please go to presentation mode.
Yes. If I could see anything here, I would do that. Okay. Just a second. Okay. 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 Okay
Well,
It's
at the
at the
bottom,
bottom, right?
bottom right, at the bottom right, the screen symbol there. Yeah, next to the slider. That one, exactly.
Okay, sorry. Yes, okay, thank you. So I'm going to talk about the calibration activity. Those are the names of the co-leaders. We have a list of objectives. First of all, to build a knowledge base about calibration, what do people actually do in calibration, to develop recommendations of best practices for crop model calibration, and then to actually help modelers to apply those best practices. So we think that calibration is a major problem in modeling. It is, we think, understudied, and there is place for a dedicated project to work on calibration. We imagined at least the project at the start as having 4 phases. The first phase was a wide-ranging survey of calibration practices. This was sent out by a survey with questions sent out to a large number of people to find out what people are actually doing for calibration. Second phase was calibration using just phenology data, where every participating team used their usual calibration practices. There were 30 different teams that participated in that phase, which is now finished. Third phase was to develop and apply a new protocol for calibration using phenology data. And then the fourth phase is to extend that protocol to calibration using not only just phenology data, but also growth data and yield data. What are the key findings up to now? Well, a number of the key findings are from that second phase with a rigorous evaluation of phenology prediction using every team's usual calibration method. Rigorous in the sense that, first of all, the prediction situation is very well defined. That is, both the calibration data and the evaluation data come from the same type of target population. So we had one target population was wheat fields in France, and the other target population was wheat fields in Australia. And the other aspect of this rigorous evaluation was that there were no sites or years in common for calibration and evaluation. The participants never saw the evaluation data. And so this is really a test of how well, given a certain number of sites and years, modelers are able to predict phenology for sites and years that that are not available for calibration. Second result is that most models do better than a simple model based just on temperature. Very often when evaluating crop models, one uses modeling efficiency, which compares crop models with using the average of the observed values. That is of interest, but not a very difficult baseline to beat. Another simple model that you could use as a comparison is a simple model that is based just on temperature sums. Do models actually do better than just a simple temperature sum? And the answer is yes. That is, that in most cases, the extra complexity in crop models is worthwhile. There are substantial differences between target populations. So the average error was quite a bit larger for Australia than for France. That is, it's not reasonable to talk about the predictive quality of the model because it is a predictive quality of a model for a particular type of target population. And also there were substantial differences between different modeling groups using the same model structure. That is, the way the calibration is done can have a significant impact on how good the predictions are. Another result of interest is the fact that in these cases, calibration and prediction errors were significantly correlated. That means that if you know which models work well for the calibration data, it might be worthwhile to weight those models more when you're looking at predictions for an ensemble, because those models that calibrate better actually turn out to predict better on the average. Another result is we have proposed a new protocol for calibration. based on just phonology data. This is a very detailed procedure. We have tested the applicability of the protocol to a large number of models. So we know that this, even though the protocol is very detailed, nonetheless, we know it can be applied to a very large number of models. And there is dedicated software to apply the protocol to different models. What are the next steps? Well, the immediate next step is evaluation of this protocol that has now been applied by something like 18 different modeling groups. A major question we have is, how do the prediction errors compare with prediction errors when each group used its usual methods? So is this protocol really an advance, and does it give better predictions than usual methods? How different is it from the usual methods? Are people pretty much doing the same thing, or is this protocol really changing the way people are doing calibration? And the third question is, if everybody's using the same protocol for calibration, how much is that we expect that obviously that is going to reduce the variability between groups in their results, because now that part of the variability due to different calibration approaches has essentially disappeared. So is there now much less variability between modeling groups? That's the immediate next step. And then we are also beginning this phase 4 of the calibration activity, which is to develop and test an expanded protocol, which uses not just phonology data, but also growth and yield data for calibration. And that's it. Thank you. And I can stop sharing.
Well, thanks, Daniel. Since you have the next talk as well on uncertainty, I suggest that you just proceed.
Okay.
And then we'll have the discussion and questions after Cheryl's presentation. And I refer everyone else to the chat where Alex Rain put in a response to one of the previous questions. So Daniel, please.
Okay, so this is the AgMIP uncertainty cross-cutting theme. That's our motto from Voltaire. Doubt is not a pleasant condition, but certainty is absurd. Say something about the structure of the uncertainty theme. It's quite different than the teams we've been hearing about up to now. So in fact, essentially everybody involved in AgMIP is involved in estimating uncertainty. As soon as you talk about model intercomparison, one of the main reasons for doing that is to look at the variability in different predictions. And in fact, that's normal when you use predictive models. There are essentially two things that you want. You want the prediction, and then you want to have some idea about how much confidence you can have in that prediction. So it's very normal that everybody in AgMIP is interested in uncertainty. So what exactly then does the uncertainty theme do? Well, we have been focusing essentially, first of all, on methodological questions. Be seeing that in a minute. And also, essentially all of the examples and applications have been uncertainty of crop model predictions at the field scale. The other point to make here is that this is not like the other teams that we've heard about, a structured long-term team where people continue working on the same subject for a fair amount of time. These are essentially, each topic is an ad hoc group that works on that specific problem. I want to talk about two recent studies that we've done. So these are two book chapters with an overview of uncertainty. And these chapters were a chance for us to give a synthesis of a lot of the previous work that had been done on uncertainty and talk about a roadmap to reducing uncertainty in the future. So the first one is a book chapter called Dealing with Uncertainty in Crop Models. This was in a book that Ken Booty edited that appeared last year. And then the other is a chapter called uncertainty of climate change impacts on crop production. And this is in a book edited by Linda Mearns and her colleagues. And essentially, this whole book is about uncertainty in climate change research, which is a further indication that uncertainty is a much larger topic than just one particular theme in AgMIP. So what we emphasized in these chapters is, first of all, that there are two very different kinds of uncertainties that people talk about, and it's very important to keep these straight. The first is model uncertainty. That is because there are uncertainty in equations and parameters and inputs, and if you're looking at regional or global level in upscaling, because of uncertainties in each of those, simulated values are uncertain. That gives you a distribution of simulated values, which you can summarize by a variance. And you can estimate it by simulating for a lot of different models, parameter values, etc. The second type of uncertainty is prediction uncertainty, which is quite different. Prediction uncertainty is the distribution of the simulated, the true value around the simulated value. That is, in model uncertainty, we're talking just about simulations. Here we are talking about relation of simulated values to the true world. You can summarize this distribution of errors of the model by a mean squared error of prediction. And if you treat the model as random, that is, if you accept the fact that you don't know exactly what the simulated values should be because there's some variability in simulated values, then you can show that the mean squared error of prediction is in fact a sum of two terms. It's the variance that comes from model uncertainty plus squared bias, which is the average, the squared error of the average over model uncertainty. Another important point to make is that uncertainty depends on what is being estimated. That is, uncertainty, for instance, in future yield under climate change is going to be quite different than uncertainty in the ratio of future yield to baseline yield. So depending on exactly how you express the problem, the uncertainty will be different. What are some ways forward for reducing crop model uncertainty? There are a lot, but these are just some of the ideas. So we said crop model uncertainty is part of this mean squared error of prediction, so it's important to reduce crop model uncertainty. Model structure, you can reduce the uncertainty in model structure by using the ensemble mean. We know that a mean always has less variability than the individual terms, and we can reduce the uncertainty by shared model improvement across models. Parameter uncertainty can be reduced by increased data. So there's a lot of work now on shared data and making data sets more widely available, and by improved calibration, that is better use of the data that's available. Input uncertainty could be a lot of things in there. Some of the things that have been focused on are obviously improving climate models to improve the input of climate information, the climate inputs into the models. Also, a major problem is that we would like to know what will future management be like and what will future adapted genotypes be like. So we have a lot of work to do on reducing the uncertainty and what the future of management and genotypes will be. Second part of reducing the mean squared error of prediction is reducing squared bias. That is the squared error of the average over simulated values. Well, first problem here is we need better estimates of how large model error is under a wide range of conditions. That is, we need more data covering aspects of climate change that haven't been sufficiently studied, extreme events in particular, and multiple stresses. We know that we can reduce squared bias by shared model improvements. So that's a lot of what a lot of AgMIP is about. And we can reduce squared error by using the median of a multi-model ensemble. So on a very large number, essentially all of the multi-model ensemble studies have shown that that's the case. What we have studied much less is maybe not a simple median, but a performance weighted mean of the models would be better. And as I said in the calibrations talk just a minute ago, there is some evidence that performance models that fit the calibration data better may be better for prediction. What are the next steps for this uncertainty activity? Probably one of the major steps will be the relation of better calibration to uncertainty, particularly how much does reduction in variability between models occur thanks to everybody using a standard calibration approach, and does that reduce prediction error, and by how much? And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Daniel. Very nice. Also very good to have these more technical aspects on uncertainty and model calibration. And we'll continue with Cheryl Porter from the University of Florida. So Cheryl, please.
Hi, everybody. So I'm reporting on behalf of myself and Meta Devara of the CG system in Wellington, Havan at International Fertilizer Development Center that has been increasingly active in this group. So this is a summary slide, the one-page summary slide, but I'm going to cover most of this in some slides that follow. The key figure and graph here is sort of my punchline where I want to end, and it's a plea to modelers, model developer groups to update your translators because we have a lot of interoperable data coming. There we go. Okay, so a little bit of the history. So a lot of the data interoperability efforts started with the DFID-funded project with AgMIP. The regional integrated assessments were part of that, and also other ensemble crop modeling protocols. And some of the data interoperability protocols and standards that were developed in those early days of AgMIP are now being implemented at the Cgiar big data platform, their Guardian portal, the fair data workflow, also at the National Agricultural Library of USDA, extending protocols from AgMIP for annotating legacy data sets, and also at the International Fertilizer Development Center. So it's gaining a lot of traction. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Agricultural Research Data Network, or ARDN. This is a NIFA-funded project for data interoperability, and it's building off of the AgMIP protocols. One of the compelling use cases for ARDN and for all of the data interoperability that I'll talk about today is this idea of a crop modeler searching for data that they can use in their models. And what we've got here is a crop modeler that puts in a couple simple search terms. The data portal could be Ag Data Commons at USDA, or it could be Guardian at the CG centers. In either case, it's going out to external data sets. So these might be Harvard Dataverse, CIMMYT, Open Data Journal, various different external data sets. So these data sets are sitting out there with a DOI, but they've been annotated such that they can be interpreted in an automated way, brought into our AgMIP standard format, and then translated to model-ready data. Of course, we know that even very detailed data sets are not completely model-ready. There's always something missing. So we're not going to get rid of the modeler in this process. It can't be fully automated, but at any rate, the data that are there can be translated to model-ready formats. So this is a schematic that shows the various workflows within ARDN, going from tools to allow data providers to annotate their data such that they can be translated in an automated way, all the way through to end user tools that were developed originally for AgMIP multi-model activities. So we've got these model-specific translators, the ACE-B format, which is AgMIP crop experiment binary. What's really new and really exciting is that we've got a tool now that will help data providers map their data such that it can be translated in an automated way. And then the sort of connective tissue are some additional translators and some tools that allow data to be discovered more easily. So VMapper that I mentioned on the last slide is a tool that will allow you to bring in your data in Excel, CSV, and we're working on JSON formats also, and map the various columns of data to ACASA terms. Once they're mapped to ACASA terms in the physical location of data on multiple spreadsheets, we produce an annotation file, which can then be used to translate the data to AgMIP. So it's got a lot of features. It'll convert units. It's got multi-table relational linkages. You can combine variables to create new variables. You can, if ACASA doesn't describe your variables, you can add your own, and so on. A lot of data has already been annotated. This is a list. I'm not going to go through it, but just suffice it to say that there's a lot of data coming, and it's really exciting to see this finally coming together. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about, and this is really Meta Devara's world, but I'm going to present for her because she couldn't be here today. And this is the Farah data workflows at Cgiar and other tools that they're developing. First of all is AgroFIMS, which allows you to design an experiment, collect data, analyze the data, and archive the data, and all the while it is already mapped to ontology-based variables and ACASA variables, such that you don't need VMapper anymore. You don't need the translators. You can, or you still need translators, sorry, but data is born fair using this system. So this is freely available. If anybody's interested, just contact me or Meta. And then for legacy data in the Cgiar, they've got a fair data workflow that allows a data provider to score their data on how fair it is, fair being findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. It also has workflows for determining whether data are, whether there's any private information in the data, so it sort of automates the detection of issues with privacy. And here's sort of a wireframe of a checklist. This doesn't exist yet, but they're working on this fair scoring system where you can go through and see what your, how fair your data is and what you need to do to make it more fair. And finally, this is a sort of a horrendogram of the CG Labs, Guardian CG Labs workflow, in which some of these tools I've talked about are embedded. So VMapper is here, some of the translators are here, and then finally they have a semantically enriched data pool, which with the translators will be data available for modeling. And back to that original slide or figure that I showed. So we developed originally a lot of translators that are model specific, and I'm a little concerned that some of those might be stale now. So this is a plea to some of the model developing groups that either develop translators or maybe even didn't ever even start. But for all of these data to be useful for your model, we'll need the model specific translators. So hopefully, we can have another hackathon or something like that to make this happen. Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Cheryl. Very nice. So we are still well in time. Yeah, I'm asking for questions. There's one in the Q&A, but I'll turn it to, sorry, there was, yes, Jean-Louis Durand, please.
Yes, I was commenting on the very good talk by Daniel Volak. And I wanted to stress the big asset AgMIP is for a special issue, which is the sharing the data over the world between all sources, especially at the moment where there is a lot more data produced by very different stakeholders. And sometimes some of them are reluctant to share their data. And AgMIP is good in showing and proving, and especially the group represented by Daniel, how more powerful any model or ensemble of models is as soon as many data are used to calibrate and validate them. So proving that a group of data, a data set which is isolated from the rest, will produce much less powerful models. And the ability of AgMIP to prove this with numbers and sound studies and published and good published journal is, in my opinion, very good. One of the very big achievement of AgMIP in that sense. That's just what I wanted to stress at that moment.
Yeah, thanks, Jean-Louis. I don't know, Daniel, you want to respond to that?
Well, that was addressed to me, but in fact, it should have been addressed to Cheryl, because Cheryl is the one who's going to make that possible, to make all of that data, this wide range of data available to modelers. So I think that's really the way we have to go.
I agree, Daniel. Sorry.
Yeah, we would love to ingest all of these data from the model intercomparisons. That would be wonderful.
Okay, very good. There is one question in the Q&A. Let's take Carolyn first. Carolyn.
Hi, thanks, Cheryl. That was great. I'm just curious, how would one decide whether one is going to actually go the FAIR route or the VMapper route regarding their data? Could you just touch on that in brief? Thanks.
So the FAIR data workflow will include VMapper as a tool. So the FAIR data workflow in the Guardian system, I think it's mainly for Cgiar data. I suppose that anybody could use that workflow for their data. That's more a question for Meta. But VMapper is freely available for anybody who would like to use it. And we're in the process of documenting that and putting it all up. I flashed up a website that has the documentation, but I can put that in the chat as well if anybody's interested.
Okay, thanks very well. So there's a question in the Q&A by Yannis Gros to the uncertainty group. So I hope Daniel can reflect on that. How uncertain are crop model parameter to predict crop growth in the future climate? Does calibrated model parameters under recent climate conditions also be representative on the future climate conditions? Not sure, Daniel, you want to take that?
Yes. So that the question is, yes, are the same parameters that are that would be used for current conditions the same parameters that would be applicable to future conditions? That's the question, as I understand it. Yes, I think the basic hypothesis in essentially all of AgMIP and crop modeling in general is that the equations are correct for a wide range of conditions with the same parameter values, and what is going to change are the inputs, that is climate and the other growing conditions. So I think that if physiological processes are going to change in the future, of course, none of the crop models would work. But I think the basic assumption, which sounds reasonable, is that yes, the same procedures will work in the future.
I think Ken is trying to jump in for help here. Yes.
You know, the premise is there, but let's just say that your current climate does not give you the range of temperature or the future CO2 data with which to set. So in that case, the parameters that determine the response to CO2 and temperature may be less certain than you would like. I think that's our big problem.
All right, and thanks. And Central, do you want to add? And then I
just want to add to this.
Move into the next panel then. Yeah.
As quickly, that's why it's so important to also use experiments which try to set up situations for the future, like a phase experiment, like a experiment where artificial heating is put into the field, to be able to test the models with situations which will come in the next decade. So I think these experiments, if they're done well, and many are done very well, help us also to reduce uncertainty with the models by testing them with some future scenarios as well.
Exactly.
Right, thank you. So it's my pleasure now to hand over the chair to Anthony Whitbread. Anthony, please take over the panel on regional aspects. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks very much, Herman. Can you just confirm you can hear me okay?
Sounds great.
Good. All right. Yeah, my pleasure to lead the next panel, panel 3, which is on regional aspects. And we have 3 short talks on low input farming systems on our old AgMIP work from India, and a new program across several projects in sub-Saharan Africa led by Sabine Homan. My name's Anthony Whitbread. I'm a research program director with ICRISAT, which is the International Crop Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics. It's one of these CGIAR centers. I'm based in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, and I've worked with AgMIP since about 2014, when I led some of the work on the DFID-funded work that we had right across the region. So a wonderful project and experience. And my program runs right across Asia and sub-Saharan Africa, working right from crop physiology through to socioeconomics and digital agriculture. And we'll cover some of it today. So without further ado, we'll go into the first session. It's my pleasure to introduce Gassion Falconier. Gassion is a researcher with CIRAD, and he's been running this AgMIP activity for a couple of years now on low input farming systems. Gassion, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Anthony. Do you hear me well? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. It's a great pleasure for me to be presenting our latest updates on low input farming systems. I will be presenting on behalf of Marc Corbels, who is leading this activity with a couple of other people. Their name is here. Marc could not join today, unfortunately. So here are the team leaders, but of course, our work relies on the great work of a larger number of crop modelers and also people doing experiments. So I will acknowledge them at the end of the presentation. I will start with the current status of the team. We started with the calibration of 25 maize models for 5 sites in sub-Saharan Africa. And we wanted really to see whether the current crop models would be able to reproduce yield variability across sub-Saharan Africa. And then more importantly, we've explored what would be the impact of climate change on maize productivity for contrasting nitrogen input, because nitrogen input is something very crucial for smallholder farmers in sub-Saharan Africa. So the study was published last year in Global Change Biology. This is the main outcome, I think. It shows on the y-axis here the yield changes, the changes in maize yield when you compare the current climate with a future climate with +4 degrees Celsius. And then on the x-axis here, you have the nitrogen input that goes from 0, which is actually close to what farmers actually currently do across sub-Saharan Africa. And then you have also 80 and 160 being close to what farmers would need to apply if they would want to go for potential yield. I think the picture here is clear. It really shows that there's an interaction between climate change and nitrogen input, and it tells us that as farmer will intensify to move closer to potential nutrient limitation will be alleviated, but then farmers will be more vulnerable to climate change. So that was really the start of activity. That was the first activity that was completed last year. And because crop response to nitrogen is so critical to accurately predict the impact of climate change, we've tried to look into more details on how crop models deal with this response to nitrogen. So here you have the grain yield against the nitrogen uptake by the crop for two sites of our first activity in Benin and in Rwanda. And the different colors here are different crop models. So what we see here is a tremendous variability in the simulated response to nitrogen inputs. So this is probably due to the fact that we lack observation to accurately calibrate this response. We don't have soil mineral nitrogen during crop growth. We have limited measurements of nitrogen in the plant. But what is interesting here is that actually there are some physical boundaries to nitrogen accumulation or dilution in the plant. And this is illustrated by the two lines here. This dotted line on the top here is the maximum dilution of nitrogen in the plant, whereas the bottom dotted line here is the maximum dilution. And you see that for some models in some sites, they actually do simulate some rather unrealistic response of crop to nitrogen inputs. So we were interested in seeing whether this impacts the uncertainty of model prediction. Here on the x-axis, it's the standard deviation of model response with a full ensemble, all the 25 crop models. And here on the y-axis, it's the selected model. So we've only selected model that predicted a realistic response to nitrogen inputs. The signal is not that clear, but still there is evidence, I think, that selecting the model for realistic response do help to reduce the uncertainty in the prediction of the impact of different climate change variables. So this is where we are. We obviously need to fix this issue of crop response to nitrogen. We need data. Fortunately, there are a couple of big European projects starting in West Africa, in Eastern and Southern Africa. And we do hope that these projects will help to support the design and monitoring of field experiments to collect the data needed to fix this. By the meantime, we're starting a new activity that is based on another crucial issue for smallholder low input systems, which is the long-term dynamics in soil carbon. Because in low input system, most of the nitrogen that is available to plants comes from the mineralization of soil organic matter. And we really want to see whether crop model can handle this. Do they simulate accurately the long-term dynamics of soil organic carbon? And do they simulate accurately the feedback this has on crop growth? And then in the second step, we're interested in seeing whether these feedbacks impact how climate change unfolds. We had the side session it was yesterday, a 2-hour side session with the maze modelers from our previous low input exercise. And we also had models from the bare soil sea dynamic activity. And I put here the reference to the work of Farah and colleagues in 2020. For this activity, we've selected 4 new sites across sub-Saharan Africa. And here you can see that these sites span a wide range of annual mean temperature and also annual precipitation, 2 parameters that are actually very important to determine how soil organic matter mineralization will occur. And also these sites differ in terms of soil texture, and they differ in terms of initial soil organic carbon. We don't have any reports or papers submitted soon. This activity is really starting. And yesterday we had really fruitful discussion with the team, with the modelers. We discussed this idea that we need to test, reset, and continuous simulation, try to see the difference between the two. It will help us to know whether this feedbacks of soil organic carbon on crop growth matters. And then it was discussed also to test crop residue addition versus crop residue removal. I think something very important in relation to this idea of conservation agriculture, where you add your residues to the soil in order to improve soil fertility. And then there were also interesting discussion on the impact of changes in soil organic carbon on soil structure, on infiltration, and also water holding capacity to model handle this process, and how does this impact on model simulations. We had 33 participants yesterday. With this, I'm done. I really thank you for your attention, and you have here the list of all the participants to the first activity, all the crop modelers and the people who gathered the experimental data. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Gassian. A very relevant talk and initiative for the work that we're doing in sub-Saharan Africa, and even many areas of the world where it's low input systems. I think there's data sets available in Australia, for instance, on low input systems in carbon. So we'll save our questions till the end. Please make your questions in the Q&A session, and then save them verbally for the end as well. Okay, we'll move on to Professor Geeta Lakshmi. Geeta, it's great to see you. Geeta is a professor of agronomy and climate from the Tamil Nadu Agricultural University in southern India. Geeta, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Anthony, and good morning to all of you. And I'm very happy to represent AgMIP India. So we had 3 projects in the phase 1 and phase 2. One was from the Indo-Gangetic Plains. So that actually, it was a multinational project with northern India, Gangetic Plains, combining with Bangladesh and Nepal. And the second one was with us in southern India. We had 2 projects, one in Tamil Nadu, another one with ICRISAT in Andhra Pradesh. So we were all the collaborating partners. And this actually shows where all we had our project location. So these are all our project location. And I'm just going to quickly go to the results, what we have obtained, and then what were the follow-ups that we have taken in our after our AgMIP 2. So this is the one, this is the follow-up. Actually, I'm not going to present the entire results, what we had from the AgMIP 1 and 2, but only the follow-ups I'm going to do it. So in the follow-up, through our student research program, we have taken up the entire Tamil Nadu state. We have tried to see what changes in climate is happening over the past, and using the multiple climate models with the AgMIP protocol, we try to develop all the scenarios, climate scenarios for 2 RCPs for the 5 different kind of bins, like hot, wet, hot, dry, cool, wet, cool, dry, and middle bin. So that we have done it. So this was very useful for our policy makers. This we provided it to them for development of a state action plan on climate change. So this was our activity. We did it after the AgMIP 2 was over. And now currently, what we are doing is we are trying to do the same work using the AgMIP 6 climate models over the entire state, so that we just wanted to see whether we can provide much more updated information to the policymakers. And then what we did was, the second thing was like we again used the climate model input onto the crop simulation models. We used 2 crop simulation models again and tried to do uncertainty assessment, and then try to understand how the climate change is impacting the maize production over Tamil Nadu, because maize is now farmers are growing maize crop in larger area because of the want of grains for the poultry industry, which is picking so well. And not only that, the Kaveri Delta zone here in this area, rice is the major crop, but in the first season, rice is getting replaced with maize because of want of water. So for that reason, we wanted to study how the maize is going to perform. And these results were also given to the policymakers for policy decisions. And this is one of the important projects done by one of our PhD scholars, and this received a Prime Minister's fellowship for doing this particular work. We have handled the entire southern Indian region, starting from Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, and then Kerala state. The major thing was the sugarcane production. So in southern India, sugarcane is one of the very important crop. So we have taken the sugarcane crop and we tied up with the sugar industry as well. So So what impact the climate change would have on the sugar mill operations, especially the crushing season, the cane availability for crushing, all those things, and major decisions they wanted to take based on the prevailing climate information, and also they wanted to plan for the future activities of the mill. So this was again one of the successful project. We did it for the whole of the southern India, comprising of all the 5 states. And then we also did the cotton. Mainly we have focused on the sensitivity analysis. The reason behind this is cotton area is dwindling like anything because of the changes in climate, and that also leads to some of the major pest and disease infestation. So the farmers are going with loss in the cotton production. So we wanted to see how the changing climatic conditions and also the sensitivity analysis on temperature, rainfall, Ctwna work we have done it for cotton, and this was given to SIMA, South India Cotton Mill Association, and we are in tying up with them in further working with that group. So this is again we used the AgMIP protocol. And onion crop, again, this is one of the very important crop for Tamil Nadu and also for the entire southern India. The prices are fluctuating from a very low price to 6 to 7 times higher price within a very short period of 1 to 2 months and all. So we try to use the AgMIP protocol to find out like what sort of changes in the climate would impact the onion production, and also more importantly, we wanted to study on the water use efficiency as well as price fluctuations. How we try to use the economic analysis as well into this particular thing. So this was one of the crop. So finally, I just wanted to give a glimpse of what is happening. This piece of work is from the ICRISAT. So whatever the work we do, we just provide this information into the palatable way for the stakeholders, especially when we present it to the policy makers. It has to be in an understandable way for them. So we just produce this type of key messages to the stakeholders, thanks to the AgMIP lead who have taught us to create this kind of messages. So for the climate, this kind of simple messages were given. All climate models predict future with a higher temperature in Karnal district, which was the study area for the Andhra Pradesh group. And then by 2050, this is the increase in temperature. So this is what the policy makers want exactly. And future rainfall, how it is going to behave. So it is showing that the models are showing that the increase is going to happen from 60 to 40%. So this is the simple information we derive from our work and we present it to the policy makers, and what impact it would have on different kind of crops, and also what adaptation strategies that would help in making the impact to a lesser extent. So these kind of simple messages we have developed and we have provided it to the policy makers. So this is a glimpse of what Indo-Gangetic plains have done. So as I said, wheat was one of the major crop for them. And here, the one important thing what we did together, the India team together, was RAPS development, Representative Agricultural Pathways Development. That actually helped us in designing the adaptation options, thinking the future, that is taking the future into consideration, future changes into consideration. So this was also appreciated very well, and we had a lot of inputs, and we had very good publications also coming out from this particular program. This is again another study from the AgMIP team. So I just wanted to share some of the things beyond AgMIP, what we did beyond AgMIP. So mainly the experience gained that was very useful for us to go with the further planning of research projects and submitting it for funding, especially the state action plan for climate change, both for Tamil Nadu as well as for Andhra Pradesh. They used most of our information, and we played a major role as far as climate change impacts on agriculture and designing the future adaptations are concerned. Then the experience obtained from AgMIP, it has helped in developing new project proposals. Some of the new project proposals, so we developed a new new project proposal involving Australian scientists, University of UWS, University of Western Sydney. They are the partner to us. We have been very successful, and I got funding from the Department of Science and Technology for Indian component, and Australia, they got funding from Australian government. So this project just started in the April 1st, and we have initiated so many works, and we are going to do something kind of a larger area modeling in this particular case. And thanks to AgMIP team for teaching us how to handle this kind of data sets and so on. Another important thing is SRI. So the system of rice intensification, this is one of the major adaptation package which we were thinking for the rice cultivation. But unfortunately, the DSAT model or APSIM model is not having the capability to handle the different components of SRI. For example, planting the young seedlings, phono weeding, all those things, alternate wetting and drying, how these changes in management practices are going to impact the rice cultivation, that was not handled by either DSAT or by APSIM model. So now we have secured a small funding. So with that, DNDC Orisa model will be employed, and this project is expected to start in the month of September. So we will be able to give something to the community in the next year. And then another thing is we are also into circular food system modeling, and our project, our abstract has been accepted, and we have submitted, and we are expecting a positive result so that we can collaborate and work on this circular food system modeling, wherein we are focusing on the smallhold farmer integrated farming system under different ecosystem with wetland condition where water is available plenty, with upland condition where limited water as well as surplus water conditions are available. Another one is rain-fed dryland ecosystem. So that we are going to concentrate in there. And more excitedly, our GCF project submitted is shortlisted, and it is under rapid approval process. And we are expecting, they have given positive comments, and we have replied to the comments. We are expecting this project very shortly. And with GAIDI, which is it is a small working group located in US, we are trying to involve a gridded model. Again, thanks to Cheryl, she has taught like how to put the components for a spatial analysis tool. So that protocol, we are going to use it, and we have started this project 2 months back, and we are progressing so well. And another one is now as a mitigation measure, we are trying to popularize AWD. Methane emission is being quantified, and we are working with CCX to give some monetary benefit to the farming community. So all these initiatives we could think and we could progress mainly because of this AgMIP activities, and I would profusely like to thank all the AgMIP team and so on. So these are all some of the publications and papers presented from the India team. I've consolidated complete work of the India team from the 3 different centers. And I think right now I have that much to show you. Thank you so much for the great opportunity given.
Thank you very much, Dr. Geeta. A pleasure to see all the work that's going on, long past the end of AgMIP phase 1 and 2. And there's even more papers that you didn't mention that are coming out as well most recently. It's also very pleasing to see it affecting policy, especially from firsthand knowledge. I know it's changing policy, government policy, and it's also affecting lending through banks such as NABARD. So we better move on. We're running out of time. The next short regional aspect is the CLARE A teams. And this is a new AgMIP activity that's being presented by Sabine Homan. Sabine's a senior social scientist with ICRISAT. She's been based in Lilongwe and in Malawi and in Zimbabwe. And her work is a lot around adaptation, intensification in crop livestock systems. I see the slides up. So Sabine, please take over.
Sorry for this lapsus. The slide is coming again.
No problem.
Okay. Good morning, afternoon, everyone. I would like to share a current state of the A-team, a follow-up initiative funded by IDRC from AgMIP phase 2 implemented in Ghana, Senegal, and in Zimbabwe. And with the main mission to bring these modeling results, integrated assessments into the use of policy decision processes. You see here the three teams with the different national stakeholders, including Roberto, who has been traveling along all the site and supported the lesson sharing and knowledge generation from these processes. The teams consist of multidisciplinary partners, Ghana University and Senegal, IPAR, and Zimbabwe, led by ICRISAT. Our main motivation is to support the national agricultural policies in developing applicable action-oriented policy recommendations, practically supporting the countries through adaptation and mitigation strategy development in their NAPs and NDCs, and elevating the regional integrated assessment to the national level, ultimately together influencing really these policy decision-making processes through collaboration with national stakeholders. Here on the top left, you see the main components. Like, this activity has been initiated with a baseline study to understand the needs for research in influencing policy decision-making processes. We combine the regional integrated assessment with a national integrated assessment in each country, and are feeding back and validating this information with national level policymakers. Then each country has a different focus. In Ghana, they are also advancing the gridded crop modeling. In Zimbabwe, we are developing a GIS-based agro-similarity approach, whereby we can identify areas for which the similar recommendations coming out of the regional integrated assessment might be applicable. And then in Senegal, they're focusing mainly on developing the national integrated assessment protocols. So as teams, we work the teams with the national stakeholders. Our current focus is still very much on the development and the completion of the national integrated and regional integrated assessment simulations. Hence, I'm giving you here mainly insights from the process rather than the modeling results themselves. We are working on context-specific adaptation packages for particular agroecological systems, and using these packages and the processes around them to really co-create policy messages with the stakeholders. At the moment, we are still publishing a number of publications from AgMIP phase 2 in all 3 countries, and we are also focusing on making this information available to the national systems, apart from the book chapters that are coming out here. Here on the top right, I would like to share with you the overview of our current engagement, which really comes from engaging the stakeholders in understanding where the agricultural policies are aiming at and what barriers are hindering achievement of these policies and what these barriers actually imply for adaptation planning. So in creating a greater consciousness of what hinders the implementation of potential, we are using different scenarios, and these scenarios through these workshops were verified with stakeholders as very useful to help guiding these decision processes. We have advanced the scenarios by adding one dimension on the dynamics of development, whereby, for example, we are saying business as usual in a country like Zimbabwe really made people understanding that if the challenges as current are continuing, this can derail the farming systems even more from the stuck state that they're already in. Whereas an investment in fast economic growth without considering the environment or the social situation can result in fast growth initially, but then negative externalities taking over. Whereas it was clearly stated that moving away from this crisis status into a sustainable agricultural development would be a very desirable situation, also building on the strengths and existing knowledge and support systems. So by engaging with stakeholders in visualizing these futures, we found critical elements that also support our research work, namely the importance of continuing simulating the farm and market dynamics. What is the interrelationship between climate change and socioeconomic parameters? How can we build capacity and networks in the countries to make use of this type of work? And what does that actually mean in terms of influencing policies? So in all the 3 countries, there was a very strong feedback that these tools are good for evidence building, but they should collaborate more with ongoing research projects to be able to scale from one particular farming systems into others, and thereby also help to close the gap actually between policy research and on the ground implementation, because policy and research at the moment are not in the optimum synergy where they can really speak to particular farming systems, so that policies are being developed that enable local growth potential to come out. And from here, a recommendation is also that this is a two-way process. On the one side, the policy action needs to open up the doors for research to come in, and on the other side, research needs to engage seriously with policymakers and use the right channels to make this research accessible and usable in their countries. So before yesterday, we also had this open house discussion amongst the teams with 10 team members. And I would just like to highlight the agreements or the similarities that we found from the lessons across the three teams, saying that yes, national stakeholders in all countries have a very high interest to collaborate. There is a high need for research-informed climate change adaptation strategies. However, we need to really address the diversity of interest and bring our research in a way that people can understand this information. Like we have technocrats that are informing policies, they need technical information, they need protocols, they need assumptions explained, whereas the decision makers themselves need just this very short, simple information. And for the stakeholders themselves to understand and use this important information, there's need for capacity building and for a really innovative way of bringing this research into the national structures and networks and engaging local scientists to take over and continue this research and help us building up a longer term continuous process of understanding the dynamics in climate change and socioeconomic structures. We know already that COVID, for example, has derailed or influenced our assumptions. In Zimbabwe as a particular country where things have changed a lot in the recent past. So there's really a need to consider these interests and political directions over longer time. And for this phase A team in particular, there's need to develop this national level protocols and combine them with the regional assessments in a way that we can work with other research programs to verify regional characterization, impact assessment, etc. For example, also with development programs who have a lot of data. So our way forward takeaway message is coming from an IDRC as the donor learning session, that advancing vulnerability and adaptation research really needs to link the national level research with building the capacity at the local level to provide research investment that informs from the local level up into the national level process, so that national policies can actually support local capacity development. And so there is really this need of continuing engaging with stakeholders to translate research into policy processes, embedding this in the national processes, like using the national advocacy networks, using the connections to bring this research in, and improve the communication between national and local levels. So our forward-looking question is like, how can we work on towards making sure that research and engagement helps to develop national policies that enables climate change adaptation at the local level? With this, I thank you for this short overview, and we are very much looking forward to share the modeling results in the next stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sabine. A fantastic story from 3 countries, Zimbabwe, Ghana, and Senegal. We have just a few minutes for questions. So far, I didn't see any questions on the chat, but if anyone's got a question verbally, please raise your hand and we can take 1 or 2 quick questions. Just make them short. I can't see anyone, but just speak. Maybe I don't see your hand if you've got a question. There's Eric from Cgiar is there. Please come, Eric.
Very interesting talk, Sabine. I have in the question because I did not understood very well what you are asking for us. Are you interested to have some modular groups helping you to do some simulation in order to have some results as a tool of mediation to speak and to exchange with your group of farmers in order to discuss and analyze what could be the impact of climate change on their system, and then imagine what could be the solution, and we can evaluate by simulation the efficiency of this solution, and then this result could be a way to have some discussion or mediation for the work you are doing with farmers and advisors. Do I understand very well or not? Thank you for your question, or your answer. Sorry.
Should I answer? Okay, yeah, exactly. So we are using the modeling simulations in an integrated way, like the crops, the livestock, very focal site-specific, farming system specific, to create a dialogue on the current policy challenges that need to be addressed and improved so that these farming systems can actually move up to their potential. And therefore we need the models to be developed in a way that they address the right crops, that they can visualize the integration between different crops and livestock and the low input systems. And we are converting all this into economic impact assessments, as you may know, which then helps us to further, it's like a process to further evaluate, like we understand, for example, that the interventions are often very incremental. We have to look for more drastic interventions. We are actually pushing stakeholders, countries to say, like, what do they need to change in order to really reduce poverty, improve nutrition from agriculture? And so there will be new questions being generated to the models also, and we are looking forward to address them in dialogue with the modelers. Yeah.
Thanks, Sabine, for that answer. Maybe a quick question to Dr. Gita. What do you need to bring together the South Asia team again? Because a lot of what you presented is from Tamil Nadu, and there is a lot of other locations that was part of AgMIP phase 1 and 2. What do we need to restart some of that work?
Yes, we actually have planned to work for AgMIP India, and we thought, like, first we will set up AgMIP India, then we will set up AgMIP South Asia team. But somehow because of paucity of funds and so on, we are actually not able to do that. But now we are trying hard. It would be good to have something like a working group kind of a thing. Even with our own small resources available, we can start working on some common protocols, and then we can build on the existing capacity, and we can get some kind of assistance, technical assistance from the AgMIP team, and then build on that. That's what is the plans which we have.
Okay. So yeah, the AgMIP leadership need to be very active in helping you find some external resources, Cynthia. Okay, I think
we're working on it.
Yeah.
We'll be in touch very soon.
We have to get DFID to start refunding India again. That's the other thing. So, okay, we've come to the end of our times. Thanks very much to the 3 colleagues for presenting wonderful work. And I'll now hand back over to Senthil, I think. Yeah.
Thanks, Anthony. We come to our last panel, which is on global changes, where we have 2 presenters. One is myself. I think that's a test on how I can control myself. The other one is Christoph Müller. So without too much to say, I'd like to maybe quickly about myself. Herman already introduced me, but just if you haven't noticed, half a year ago, I left University of Florida, and I'm now with the Technical University of Munich. It's great to see some of my colleagues from UF back here on this meeting again. That's really nice. Let's share. Can someone, I can see Cynthia, can you see that one? Can you? Yes, great. Just a quick report on a relatively small activity, which we call at the moment AgMIP Extreme Impacts. That's sort of coming out of wheat. Obviously, it deals with wheat again, where we have a really fantastic access to an amazing data set from France and from Brazil. And in France, these are very detailed data from an organization called Avalis. This is a non-profit organization, which has been taking very detailed experiments across France for many years, in some locations for up to 20 years, and they make these data available to us to try to help them and do it together to understand what causes extreme low yields in some seasons. Can we actually model them, or what's missing in modeling when we try to sort of expand from these experiments into some global applications. So in this activity, we basically use a lot of experimental data. We also use regional data, in this case, particularly from Brazil. We started with some statistical approaches, and we also want to move into dynamic simulation models, but we also realized that in some of the situations, there are things happening, and I think I could hear it from some of the other talks as well. There are things happening which the models don't take into account. So eventually, if we want to go in there and we really understand what's going on, we probably have to improve and expand our modeling capacity. So the group, as I said, it's sort of co-led with the same co-leadership team from AgMIP, Per Matre, Frank Ebert, and Heidi Wepper. We have only 4 modeling groups at the moment. We keep it very small because we don't have much funding yet to sort of expand that and open it up. We have really good experimentalists in there. We have 1 economist, 1 biostatistician, and 1 climate scientist. That's a small team at the moment. And for the last year, we spent, as I said, a lot of time trying to understand data and what's going on. So we want to analyze them, what's happened when we really get a low yield. We sometimes also want to see how does yield relate to production, because area cropped or area lost in extreme years could also affect production. We think there will be modeling improvement, probably related to excess water, heavy rainfalls. That was one of the questions today as well. And diseases, pest and diseases might also play a role in there. But the good thing, there's actually activity in pest and diseases, which I think you will hear more in the next session. And at the moment, so far, we've only been able to sort of use statistical approaches for quantifying extremes. We have a paper submitted, and I want to share one example out of several where we use the CIMIT-6 data. So from 1815 to 2010, these are a 30-year running mean frequency of extreme low wheat production in Brazil. It's very important for Brazil because there's actually a relatively large percentage of the population still hungry, about 10%. And in particular, in low production years, the government has to import more wheat, so it puts a lot of stress on very vulnerable people in Brazil. And what we show in here, these are 3 price scenarios. Price plays a role in deciding how much area is cropped. Then we have a statistical model for different regions built on 20 years of data. Then we take into account how much area is cropped, how the season and particular parts of the season affects the crop, including if you lose some of the area. So it's a multi-leveled statistical approach at the moment. What it shows here, this model has been trained on data from 2020 to for the last 20 years, basically from 2001 to 2020. And this is a running mean. That's why you can see in the future, the frequency of having an extreme, which has been defined by the most extreme season in the last 20 years, will under certain price scenarios become almost normal by the end of the century. So under low price scenarios and under an RCP 8, there will be basically almost every year an extreme as they had in the last 20 years under different price scenarios and obviously under different RCPs. They all increase in the future. You can see it has been rather steady on a very small level if you take the climate data in from the last 150 years. But the future for dealing with extremes will really change. Basically, that's what I summarized here. And we didn't have an open house meeting yesterday. We meet monthly, or almost monthly, with a small team at the moment, and so I try to progress that. But at the moment, lots of that is dealing with data. And I think we are very lucky to have access to very detailed field data, which can help to us to understand of what's going on in these systems. So that I stop and there's no discussion now, we have a discussion afterwards. I'd like to hand over to Christoph Müller. Christoph is with the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. He is a leader for the land use resilience unit at the institute there, but he's also a co-chair of the Global Gridded Crop Modeling Intercomparison. Christoph, are you there? Yes, you're there. Can you please upload your presentation?
You should see it now.
Yes, we can see it. Thanks.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Santold, for the introduction, and welcome to everybody. So I'm the one to keep you from the coffee after the end of the session, so I try to be brief. So I'm presenting the Global Gridded Crop Model Intercomparison, which is one of the two global activities in AgMIP. And yeah, we have lots of material. I try to cover that. If I manage to move forward. Okay, just quickly to remind you, we are not only looking into crop yield projections and simulations for the full globe, but we are also trying to address associated environmental impacts, so water consumption, carbon and nitrogen emissions associated with different management forms, as agriculture is not only interesting from the food perspective, but also from many SDGs, and therefore there's quite some demand for information on these aspects at larger scales. And we of course also look into uncertainties, and the double I in AgMIP, the intercomparison and improvement, is important. So we also try to learn from these differences and try to make sure that models are right for the right reasons and not for any error compensating mechanisms. Doesn't progress somehow. So just very quickly, one central element in our work is that we publish all input and output data in global central repositories that are easily accessible. So in Zenodo, I've created an AgMIP community so that data are easily findable, hopefully, or more easily findable. And we have basically finalized the so-called fast track activity together with AgMIP and the phase 1, which was the historic period with a focus on evaluation. And now we are still working on the results of phase 2, which was a big input variation sensitivity experiment. And now are remaking the so-called fast track with updated input data from CMIP6, updated management data, a larger model ensemble and updated ensemble models there. We've come quite some way, doing lots of interesting stuff on the way, so much too much to highlight here. So what I do want to do is, because I think these are great entry points for interaction with other groups and also other focus topics. One is the Ctwna emulators that we've developed, or Jim Franke mostly developed it based on the ggCMI data from this phase 2. On the left, you can see how the emulator equation looks like. And basically, we have a spatially explicit emulator across the CO2, temperature, water, and nitrogen dimensions with different emulators for a system with adaptation and without adaptation. And we also have these emulators for irrigation water demand. And this is much more lightweight. And we have that for 9 different crop models. And you can then apply it to any climate and management scenario that you can squeeze into these 5 dimensions. And that is much more lightweight than running these process-based simulations themselves. And this is just an example of how we made use of that flexibility then of the system. So here we ran the entire CMIP6 archive. We also did that for CMIP5, but here I only show you CMIP6. Entire archive to try to understand if we try to consider the full breadth of future scenarios based on crop models and different crops and different climate scenarios, how important is the uncertainty introduced from crop models and from climate models. And unfortunately, for most of the 21st century, this choice of the crop models is more important than the choice of the climate scenario. The climate scenario variance is quite large, but still, or the induced variance is quite large, but still smaller than the variance that's induced by the selection of the crop models. Only at the end of the 21st century, you see that the role changes, and then the climate scenarios introduce a larger share of uncertainty to overall uncertainty. Moving on to our current activity. So this is work by Jonas Jägermeier, basically comparing the fast track data that's here called GC5, which was published by Cynthia Rosenzweig in 2014, with the new ensemble, new climate scenarios. And you see here the graph for maize. There's the median is a big black line, and you see a small gray bar. This is the legacy data basically, and the larger data is the new data set. And you see that there are tremendous changes in the median response. So for maize, the ensemble now projects a much more negative change in crop production than the old ensemble did. But you also see, and this is the vertical line, this is the spread of crop models, and the dashed line is the spread of climate scenarios, both in the old set and the new set. The green is the RCP 2.6, and the red is RCP 8.5. I will focus on the 8.5 here for brevity. And you see that there's a tremendous difference in model outcomes depending on what crop model you ask. Keep in mind that in the evaluation, like at the global aggregation level, most crop models had similar skill in reproducing historic patterns. So the comparison to historic patterns is not necessarily an indicator for the skill of the model to predict future dynamics. So otherwise we would have such a huge spread from models that have a similar skill in historics. Yeah, we also have that for the other crops, similar picture, except wheat, which is a little bit different because here the response became more positive than it used to be, whereas in soybean and rice, the response is less positive or slightly negative in the median, but you also see here uncertainties are tremendous. Jonas did a great job in digging into the sources of these differences, because while we have new crop models, new management information, new climate scenarios, so how come that the ensemble projections are so different from what they used to be? And I don't have the time to run you through this entire figure, but he basically tried to take a subsample of crop models that contributed to both ensembles, finding that this doesn't make a difference. And then he looked at normalized responses to climate change expressed as 1 degree of warming from 1 to 2 or from 2 to 3, and the sensitivity to CO2 fertilization. And you see that in blue, the new ensemble is more sensitive to climate change than the old ensemble was in red, and is less sensitive to CO2 than the old ensemble was. And apparently the combination of these two features makes much of the difference that we see in the overall response. Jonas is using this mostly to pursue the question, when is the new normal outside the range of variance or the range of variability that was observed in the past. And here you see basically these gray dashed lines, horizontal lines, is basically the range of variability that was observable in the historic period, being the mixture of model uncertainty and variability in time. And then when the models emerge from this envelope, that's what we call the emergence from noise. And you see that this happens for maize, for the RCP 8.5 at around 2032. and in RCP 2.6, this happens later in the century and only barely crosses this line. For wheat, we see an emergence to the upper end because overall production in the global aggregation gets increases compared to the historic baseline. And this global aggregation, of course, has a spatial pattern to it. So you can see here in the different colors when the emergence to the lower bound in red or the upper bound in blue is reached in time. And on the right, you see that the area that is affected by that the new norm is outside the observed variability of the past is very large. So 74% of the maize production area will experience that by the by the end of the 21st century, whereas it was only half in the old ensemble. And for maize, you see a similar picture. Yeah, moving on, and just to highlight the many options for collaboration. So we are working on trying to build a database of information on how crop models or how crops are grown across the world, like what management systems exist, what inputs are used, and so on. We are in a very intense exchange with the integrated assessment modeling and the land use modeling community, the Global Econ Group in AgMIP, for example, food security questions, nutrition related aspects and diets, pollution and degradation of the environment, biogeochemistry, the SDGs, as already said at the beginning, and region assessments can all link up to us. I've circled the two most likely entry points for such collaboration, namely the currently ongoing phase 3 simulations and the emulators if you look for something more flexible. And with that, I hope I didn't overwhelm you with the information, and thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Gustav. There seems to be a lot of things going on in the global good modeling community. That's really cool. Are there any questions? I think Katin is raising his hand.
Thanks, Gustav, for your nice presentation. I was just wondering if you've said that spatially explicit crop management data is an issue for your group, and apparently there has been some recent advances in this. You're using new data. Can you just elaborate a bit more? And could that also be a reason why you have such differences between GC5 and GC6?
That's a good point, indeed. Like in the fast track, we, as the name already says, things were rushed a little bit, and we didn't have enough capacity and time to really make sure that all these management assumptions were neatly harmonized across the different modeling groups. That has improved, but also the data has improved. Again, owners made a tremendous effort to combine different crop calendar products for different crops in different regions to build one global database. Again, we had to work on like which of these products do we trust most, because of course they disagree. And we've made efforts for more spatially explicit or higher spatial resolution data sets on fertilizer inputs, on manure inputs, and we've also worked on the ability, and that's Sarah Minoli's work, to project changes in cropping seasons. So like basically when the climate changes, then we expect that farmers would change the growing season as well, but obviously there's no observational data on that. So we needed to develop a model that can project that for us. And that's also a great advance compared to the assumption that across the 21st century, farmers will just do what they did in the last century. But yeah, we don't have results on that yet, but that will definitely make the results much more tangible and more relevant for users, I think.
Okay, thanks, Christoph. There's another question, maybe it's, for you. The question is, why does uncertainty changes over time? That first the crop models are more uncertain, and later the climate change models become more uncertain towards the end of the century. Is there a short answer for that?
Well, the short answer is probably that uncertainties are developing in a nonlinear way, and with the increasing radiative forcing, also the differences between climate scenarios or the implementations in different GCMs of the same forcing scenario leads to very different results. And then this seems to overrule the uncertainty from how crop models respond to that.
Okay, cool, great, thanks. With that, are there any questions for, we're running a bit late, maybe just add another 2 or 3 minutes. Are there any major comments or questions related to all of them before we sort of wrap up and close the session? Cynthia.
Just want to say thank you to all of the presenters and all the participants. I'm not sure we're even calling this a forum. I think it's the AgMIP marathon of seeing the range of amazing work across all the teams. So just want to say thanks to everybody, all the teams, the team leaders and the participants in the teams, the modelers who make all this amazing work possible. So thanks to everybody. And thanks Sentold and Anthony and Herman for leading us through, guiding us through the marathon.
Thanks, Cynthia. That's probably a good summary. Just wanted to add, there's even more. So if you heard a lot about the crop activities, if you have the chance to go to this next session, there's also a soybean team which is very active. There's things happening on pests and diseases, on soils, on ozone. So there's even more going on in this space. So I think this is just fantastic to see how active after so many years and how advanced and sophisticated some of these activities are. But that's only the cropping side. I think was also quite nice to see how the data are processed in other ways to look at calibration uncertainty. And as Cheryl mentioned and encouraged to everyone, please use her tools there because it really gives you access to a lot of data. And regarding data, I think Christoph mentioned it as well, make your data available. There are a lot of different tools, even data journals where you get credit for it. Make them available through these tools so that other people can also reuse them and re-evaluate their models or their approaches. In the third panel, I thought it was really great to see how in regional activities, models integrated in these activities, how they're linked to messaging, things to politicians, but also highlighting again that these models still missing some critical aspects, particularly when we want to move forward into more climate change and maybe also into extremes. And obviously last, the global challenges, I think extreme impacts, there's probably much more needed, and I think there are other activities as well. And it's great to see the wide range of activities and impacts the global gridded modeling community has as well. So with this, I think we really saw a fantastic snapshot, maybe only. And I think we should repeat these things as we've done in the past, hopefully in person next time, because I think we still, and it will continue, we can learn a lot from each other. And there are things moving in parallel, which is great. There are ways to bring things together. We can also explore new ways by seeing how other groups actually doing this. So again, also big thanks to me. Thanks also to my 2 co-hosts. Both of them, unfortunately, Herman and Anthony, had to leave a bit earlier. They had other commitments. So thanks to these both. Thanks to every presenter. Also, big thanks to the participants. I think the highest number I've seen was 99 today. That's a great outcome. So thanks to everyone. Keep up the great work. And I'm looking forward to the next real meeting where we meet. But also keep in mind, there's another session where it's probably as good as this one, maybe even better, which will follow in a few hours. Thank you very much to everyone.
Thank
Thank
you, everyone.
Thank you, Santal. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
thanks.